part two, the Devaney Era, 1962 to 72. And as you just said there, Mike, NU went 5-6 during that time. As we look at the win-loss here, there was a little bit of back and forth at the beginning. Oklahoma winning the first one, Nebraska going back and forth there. But then kind of as we see throughout the course of this, Oklahoma has a streak of 3 wins, Nebraska has a streak of 3 wins, and then Oklahoma wins the last one. So let's start it off here. Let's go to 1962. Devaney is brought in. It's his first year. And Wilkinson is towards the tail end of his career at Oklahoma. And Mike, I'll kind of let you start there. 1962.
Okay, it's not. So 1962, that game is not on commercial television, but it is presented on closed circuit on the big screen at Pershing Auditorium. Mm-hmm. I came down from my hometown of York with some friends to see that game on the big screen. And you went in there and it was on, I think, 4 sides and you could see it. The telecast wasn't that great. It didn't turn out, but neither was the game. So, and the only thing I remember about it is Jim Bappico and a block punt. I mean, it was 34-6, wasn't that the final score? It wasn't.
Sounds right.
I had all these high hopes, because Nebraska, Devaney's first loss was to Missouri, 16-7, and it looked like, hey, things are really looking good here. And then it turned out to be not such a good game there. Oklahoma dominated.
We lose that first time to Oklahoma, but in season 2, 1963. We get that first win, but that game is probably more noted for the timing of the game. Saturday, November 23rd, the day after John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. And I've read some things and seen some things about how Bud Wilkinson, I think he was on some different like national, boards that he knew JFK and made some statement that I think JFK would want the game being played and that we were one of the only games that was played because a lot of them were being canceled that weekend, right?
Yeah. I think there was a quote in the newspapers about that JFK would have wanted this game to be played. I think the driving force behind it to a good degree was the Orange Bowl. Needed to find out whether it was going to be Nebraska or Oklahoma playing in the Orange Bowl. And so I think Orange Bowl officials were involved in that decision making as well. Again, it wasn't televised national. It wasn't a national telecast, but it was televised locally by Channel 10. Did televise the game, but it was through the night that they supposedly phone calls back and forth between Washington D.C. and the university officials and the Orange Bowl and so forth as to whether they would play that game. Not very many games were played, but they wanted to get played to determine who would be the Orange Bowl representative.
And on the field, obviously, that's a huge game for us. It's a huge win for Devaney. Nebraska wins the Big 8. They go to the Orange Bowl. They play Auburn, and it's starting to now. Nebraska's starting to get some of that momentum going and some of that success. In '64, we go back down to Oklahoma. We lose to Oklahoma in '64, but in '65 we win it, and it creates Devaney's first undefeated season.
The Cornhuskers have wrapped up their first perfect season in 50 years. With 10 wins and no losses, Coach Bob Devaney's Nebraska record is now 38 wins and 5 losses. This is the 3rd consecutive Big 8 title for Coach Bob Devaney. Coach Bob Devaney has had a shower. He is dripping wet. Coach, you're all wet. Do you enjoy this kind of a treatment after a ball game?
Well, anytime we can go 10-0, well, I'll take that shower with my clothes on very gratefully.
Of course, you've set a great tradition as a winning coach here, but this is the first time this has happened in the state of Nebraska in 50 years.
Well, Mark, it's the first all-winning season that I've ever had as a head coach also in college football.
So, Mike, I mean, they just said that they're the first time in 50 years for the program, first time for Devaney as a coach, an undefeated season. I get a little lost in these mid-60s. I think of the 69, 70, and 71 teams, but we were starting to really have a lot of success right here in this era too.
Yeah, he had success. Devaney was doing what people thought that he could do when he came here. It looked like a great hire, except that they, playing Alabama in bowl games, it wasn't a good situation for the Huskers. Bear Bryant was kind of a frustration for the Huskers during that time.
There was a Devaney biography I watched that, and it was great. They were interviewing Devaney about the Alabama, and I think it must have been the next season because we played them back to back in the bowl game, and Bear Bryant calls him up and says, "Hey, Bob, we'd love to play you again. We had so much fun last year and everything. And it'd be so much fun to play you again." And Devaney goes, "They beat the shit out of us." and for NET to allow the S word to be played on it, because they didn't beep it out, or maybe they beeped it out, but it was the fact that we knew what Bob, the feisty Irishman there, he had to let that little one out there. And so I mean, 65, we win at 66. We lose to Oklahoma there. And then the last time I talked to you, when we did Husker History 101, I kind of made a statement and you called me on it right away. I go, then we had these down years of 67, 68, and you're like, they went 6-4. It wasn't terrible. And actually something I really learned from you here, and I'm going to play this video over while we're talking. You had mentioned how this is 1967 against Oklahoma. You'd mentioned how 67, actually, we had like one of the top defenses in the country. I didn't realize that.
Number one ranked defense in the country.
Yeah, number one. So it was just the off, and we were seeing some sacks here, and these are tackles in the backfield. So great defense. And actually, I mean, we couldn't put up more than 15 points in a game, it seemed like.
Yeah, Wayne Malin finished 9th in voting for the Heisman Trophy that year. He was the middle guard. It started his career as an offensive guard, and they moved him to middle guard, and he became an All-American. 67, Nebraska had a great defense, but had a problem with quarterbacks throwing interceptions. And Tom Osborne told me once that it was 67, 68. During that time is when he realized that a rushing yard was worth more than a passing yard, just because of the potential for interceptions and so forth.
And he started to become more involved on the offensive side during this time too. Correct?
Yeah, right. Exactly. There was actually a petition circulated in Omaha to get rid of Devaney because Bob always joked, his secretary handled all of his mail, and she went through it, and he said that she must have thrown away the letter about the petition being circulated in Omaha, because if he'd have known about that, he'd have signed it himself. But, there was frustration. 2 back-to-back 6-4 seasons, and people were frustrated with the program. And the only reason the petition was circulated was because the initial argument was you need to get rid of some assistant coaches. And Bob said, no, I'm not. That's not going to happen. I'm not going to get rid of any assistant coaches. And then the circulation of the petition to get rid of him, and didn't come to anything, obviously. And in 69, you get things turned around.
Think about that.
Turned around from 6-4.
Yeah, think about that, Boomer. He was really guilty of not meeting the standards that he had created. He took over this program.
Nothing.
He took over at nothing, and all of a sudden 6-4 wasn't acceptable anymore. After 5 years of that.
Well,
and you were playing
petitions, getting coaches fired. Apparently, that must have been there.
That was 65, 66, and 67. Those were all Thanksgiving Day games.
Oh,
people always remember the Oklahoma game as Thanksgiving Day. It was played 5 times on Thanksgiving: 65, 66, 67, 71, and 72. The rest of the time it was played on the Friday after. I think it was played 10 times on the Friday after.
And you mentioned that only like 3 times. It was normally the last game of the season, but on 3 different occasions, there was a game, a Big 8 game, a conference game that followed it.
Yeah. The 59 one was Halloween, and then the 78 game Missouri played Missouri after that, unfortunately.
We'll get to that one.
The 87 game played Colorado after that game.
So 68, as you mentioned earlier, we get blown out, and that's about the time that the petition's coming around. But around this time, we start making some changes with our recruiting, started going more into some JUCOs, getting some older guys. I know on the line we got some guys in there.
Out west.
out west, and then obviously some of the young guys that you start hearing the names over the course of 69, 70, and 71. You start hearing about Taggy and Kinney and Rogers and all these guys. So Nebraska, in the true spirit of this series being a bunch of streaks, we start the streak of 69 to 71, and maybe let's focus on that right now. The 69 season doesn't get a lot of the discussion because obviously 70 and 71 are national championship years, but my mom, she went to the Sun Bowl in 69. So she's told me about that game and everything, beat Georgia pretty handily, but also we beat Oklahoma handily. What happened in 69, Mike? How did we start to get this thing flipped around to lead up to what we're going to see the following 2 years?
Well, you had Osborne. I think Tom was effectively the offensive coordinator at that point, although he didn't have that title. Bob never had anybody with that title. You didn't start that until Tom became the head coach. But Tom kind of became the offensive coordinator. He started meeting with the quarterbacks, which they hadn't done before. And they changed to a kind of a spread offense. That was part of the deal, part of what he needed to do. And then he was one of the guys that was primarily responsible for recruiting on the West Coast, where they got these junior college, Bob Newton most notably, but Bob Terrio ended up being a linebacker. Dick Rupert, Carl Johnson came from out west. I mean, they were getting these guys, Keith Wortman. They were getting offensive linemen. I think one of the things that sort of confused them was that when they played Alabama in these bowl games, Alabama had small, quick linemen. And Devaney kind of joked, that, hey, we followed Alabama. We got small linemen, but they weren't quick. And they changed their recruiting pattern. So with that, the change in the offense, and the fact that they had somebody that was responsible for that, he was listed as the end coach, but he was meeting with the quarterbacks and he was basically coordinating the offense. That turned things around. And, by that point, I think it was the 69 bowl game. By then, Bob had told Tom that he wanted him to succeed as head coach. And his plan was to finish after the 71 season. That was Bob's original plan. And Tom thought that, he always said, following someone who's as successful as Bob had been was extremely difficult. And he looked into other coaching jobs, including the Texas Tech job, I believe. That year that they went down to the Sun Bowl, Tom went over to Texas Tech and interviewed for the job and didn't get it. Jim Carlin maybe got it. And Tom looked into a couple other jobs where he could coach. One of them was a coaching and teaching job at a smaller college kind of thing. But that's what turned things around, was his direction, I think. And the recruiting thing. You got to have the players, obviously, and Nebraska had a lot of talent.
Got a lot of talent. Well, that talent's now we're starting to transition in the 70s, and here's the 1970 game.
27 yards needed for the touchdown. That could give them a victory if they went for two and made it. Threw it on the wing to the right. Jack Mildren, the quarterback. Here we go. Fourth down play. Mildren drops back to pass. Mildren looks. He throws in the end zone. Tipped in the air. Intercepted by Anderson as the time runs out at the 10. And he runs out of bounds on the far side at the gun.
Boomer, victory.
Now, there was not good sportsmanship there on that play.
No,
not at all.
He got hammered there.
That's a late hit. Speaking of hammered, these are diplomats that Boomer has made, and these are very good drinks here. Thank you very much.
Certainly, glad I can help.
So 1970, we obviously get now it's the first time Devaney has won consecutive games in a row at that point against Oklahoma, and through the wonderful bowl system that we have, in a series of Texas lost, and was it Ohio State? I mean, who were the teams that lost that set Nebraska up to when they played LSU? All of a sudden, that game was for the national championship.
Yeah, it was Ohio State lost and Texas lost in bowl games that day. And Nebraska knew then, I think, that if they could win the game, they had an opportunity to win a national championship. And I think, was it Notre Dame that had beat Texas? and Parsegian was like, oh, we should be national champions. It didn't happen that way.
And Texas was national champs in one of the two polls.
Right, because they didn't do a post-bowl poll.
Yeah, was that AP or is that UPI? Which one was
that? Was the UPI. That was the coaches poll.
Okay.
The Associated Press, the writers poll came after the bowl game. So Texas, which got upset in the Cotton Bowl by Notre Dame, and Ohio State got upset in the Rose Bowl by Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Right. Yeah.
And that opened the door for Nebraska. Nebraska knew about it. By the time kickoff came, Nebraska knew that it had an opportunity if it won that game.
We're going to talk in a little bit in the next segment. We're going to talk about what bowl games and motivation can do for a bowl game. But that, right there, I mean, that says a lot going into that LSU game, knowing that what we're playing for could be the national championship. No doubt I played a role. And Guy Ingles talked about who the little tiny middle guard that we had on the team in 70, that he was just going nuts on the bus. Poulier or something. I can't think of his last name. But it was like this little dude, he's like 5'11", but he played middle guard and was just like going crazy on the bus, leading up to the
Eddie Perryard.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, he was.
I knew, Mike, you're going to fill in every gap of whatever I don't.
I remember some of these things. But Eddie Perryard was a tough guy, and he was about 5'9" or something, 5'10". Maybe he just was really short, but boy, he was tough, and they had a hard time dealing with him.
Well, here we are. We've gotten through the 70 season. It was an undefeated year. We did tie USC, but won the national championship, first ever national championship that we could claim so many from the Steam years. If we were,
but we'll get to that later.
If we were Michigan, we would have 38 championships right now. We just claim all those.
The Steam years, 1915, they had an opportunity to go to the Rose Bowl.
The
administration said no.
Money. Yeah.
They got plus the faculty said, look, this would put too much emphasis on athletics. We can't be doing this. Which is the reason that they lost Jumbo Steam, because they wouldn't raise his salary, because the faculty and the administration said no football coach should make more than faculty members. Even though there were boosters
even offered to pay for it. Yeah. They wouldn't even have to come out of university funds. They were going to pony up the money.
The boosters were going to pay for it. Indiana had offered him $4,500, and he said he'd stay for $4,250. And the boosters raised the money. He was making $35,000, and the administration said, "No, can't do that. Can't happen."
And there's been a curse on the basketball program ever since.
Well, football, we've never won the Big Ten since.
That's true.
Go to Indiana. The sad thing was that Steam had died of stomach cancer about 6 years later.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, it wouldn't have been a long-term thing. But
Well, 1971. I mean, this is it. This is the game of the century. This will probably be its own little segment by itself here. But let's. Boomer, you mentioned the first game you went to, 1991. This is actually the first part of this video clip is that game. You can almost feel how cold it is coming through the video. But this was taken from the 20th. I got some update on my laptop. Get that out of the way. This is taken from the 1991 game, the 20th anniversary of it. Here's the game of the century.
Over the years, the Oklahoma-Nebraska Thanksgiving Showdown has produced many legendary games. But Devaney is almost always asked to talk about what has become known as a game of the century.
20 years ago, almost exactly to the day, it was on Thanksgiving, of course, in 1971. And here it is 20 years later, and if anything, the game has gotten bigger than it was at the time.
Yeah, and the players all get better, and the coaching gets better, and everything.
71, the game for number one. Unbeaten and untied Nebraska versus unbeaten and untied Oklahoma.
Well, Mike, we have this update that came on my laptop, and I am really hoping it does not restart my computer as during it. But anyways, the Oklahoma game here. Let's talk about the 1971 Oklahoma game. It's number one versus number two. All the lead up, everything that's going up to it. I mean, what was it like in 1971? What made that game, I guess, the game of the century?
In part, I would say the media and Sports Illustrated probably made it the game of the century. You define it in that way. I remember the cover of Sports Illustrated, the irresistible Oklahoma meets immovable Nebraska with Bob Terrio and Greg Pruitt on the cover. And, look at the conference, how dramatic at the end of the year, it was Nebraska number 1, Oklahoma number 2, Colorado number 3 in the eight. People think how strong the conference was then. The only games that Colorado lost were to Oklahoma and Nebraska. The only game Oklahoma lost was to Nebraska. The conference was strong, and it was the middle of the country, and it was a Thanksgiving Day game. Some of it is just generated by the circumstances. It didn't hurt that it was on Thanksgiving Day, right? You could call it the game of the century because everybody's watching. And, you've got number 1 ranked team, number 2 ranked team has to be, you go back to Notre Dame and Michigan State, what year that was, where they played to a tie where Notre Dame didn't try to win it at the end and end up being a national champion.
Was that 68 or 69?
66 maybe.
Yeah, 60, that sounds right. They had Bubba Smith and
yeah.
But yeah, that Colorado team. Well, what gets lost in 71 is that the Iron Bowl between Auburn and Alabama was against 2 undefeated teams. That was the first time that Iron Bowl had been like that. So this is, as far as what's going on down there in the state of Alabama, that's as good as those programs are, up to that point. And Auburn goes on, loses handily to Alabama, and gets blown out in their bowl game by Oklahoma. Nebraska goes and plays an undefeated Alabama team, Bear Bryant, who thought that was one of his best teams, and just waxes the field with them. And that Colorado team lost by, I think it was, Colorado beat LSU. The non-conference record or schedule for Colorado in 71 was like LSU and Ohio State, 2 top 10 teams. And Colorado beat LSU on the road by 10 points. Alabama beat that LSU team on the road by 7. So, to your point, that's how good the Big 8 was. Colorado was the 3rd best team in the country, and really deservingly. I mean, that was probably a national championship caliber kind of team, except they were just a buzzsaw of a conference with Oklahoma and Nebraska.
Yeah, it was really, there was no question. And, the Iron Bowl, I don't think Auburn was as established as Oklahoma. Alabama certainly was, but Oklahoma, Nebraska, both, you'd probably think of both of them before you'd think of Auburn at that point. And I think that probably had something to do with where that fell as well. But yeah, that the conference is what was the big factor, and I really feel like the fact that it was played on Thanksgiving Day, when it was in prime time, it just that's what helped it promote this, the game of the century. It's Sports Illustrated. Look what Sports Illustrated did, put it on the cover.
Yeah. Well, and here's the play that at least goes down as the play that really signifies it. And here's Johnny Rodgers.
Wiley in the kick. Wiley stands at his own 24, waits for the snap. Rodgers deep for Nebraska. Here's Wiley's kick. It's high. It holds up there. Rodgers takes the ball at the 30. He's hit and got away. Back upfield to the 35, to the 40. He's to the 45. He's to the 50, to the 45, to the 40, to the 35, to the 20, to the 10. He's all the way home. Woman and child did that. Put them in the aisles. Johnny the Jet Rodgers just tore them loose from their shoes.
Johnny the Jet Rodgers just tore him loose from the shoes. I mean, that is Lyle Bremser at his absolute best. That's an iconic play. And we talked about this before the show, Mike. What gets lost in this is that people think, I think sometimes people may think that was the game-winning play. That happened right away.
That got Nebraska off to a good start anyway. Certainly.
And Rodgers definitely played a big role in the game because, as you mentioned too, his biggest contribution might have come, on that final drive.
Yeah. On the Final drive, 12 plays, 74 yards, 5 minutes plus. Johnny, they got at the 46-yard line of Oklahoma, they've got 3rd down and 8. And Johnny breaks his route and cuts across the middle because of the way the Sooner defense was set up. And Taggy throws a pass. It's low. Johnny goes down and gets it, picks up the 1st down for 11 yards to the 35. And from there, Nebraska, I think Kenny had 13-yard carry after that. Johnny carried once, and then Kenny carried 3 times into the end zone for the play that we remember because that was the game-winning touchdown. But it was that 3rd down catch by Johnny. First of all, breaking his route, and second of all, going down and getting that ball. That really, I think that was the play of the game. Nebraska doesn't win the game if he doesn't make that play. I believe.
Yeah, Johnny said the same thing. I've seen him in interviews where he said that was the play.
But yeah, but the kickoff return, got Nebraska rolling, and you think about that Nebraska team. So you got Larry Jacobson, who won the Outland Trophy that year. You've got Rich Glover, who won the Outland Trophy and the Lombardi the next year. You got Johnny Rodgers, who won the Heisman Trophy the next year. The talent on that Nebraska team was remarkable and, irresistible Nebraska, immovable Nebraska, Oklahoma, that wishbone.
Yeah,
that was a thing.
Irresistible Oklahoma meets immovable Nebraska.
Yeah. And the best defense in the country, Nebraska, the best offense in the country, Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm. And that's something, Mike, obviously we're a Nebraska podcast, so we're going to obviously focus on the Nebraska side of this. But, that Oklahoma team, to talk about some of their players too. I mean, obviously they had Pruitt in the backfield and Mildren. Berhaney is an All-American center, and for Glover to go out and have 20-some tackles.
22 tackles, yeah.
22 tackles. And we are Columbus Scotus guys. And so both Boomer and I and Scotus, Joe Blaha and Bill Cush. And these guys are getting moved around. Cush is the fast guy, but they moved him to play corner where, hey, we just need to throw a fast guy over there because Blaha's going to play this monster back to defend this wishbone. That's the important thing. It's all about discipline and defending the wishbone. And Oklahoma, Mildren with John Harrison, they end up really hitting us hard with the pass in that game.
Yeah, well, that's how that's the thing that you don't expect that from Oklahoma because of the way you run that wishbone T, they're still calling it, I guess, at that point, but they're running that wishbone offense, and you don't expect that kind of because there were games where Oklahoma didn't throw the ball very much at all, and that's a way that's going to cross you up. You prepare for it because it's something you really have to prepare for in order to stop that, and you have to be disciplined. You've got your man, and you got to stay with him, and then they mix things up a little bit.
There was a story of Willie Harper. I think I read it it might have been the Devaney book actually that you helped co-write with Devaney and Friends. It might have been in that book. Oh, and by the way, also this is Nebraska, the Football Vault by Mike Babcock. We're just throwing out all kinds of, everything there. But
find retailers near you.
Yes, by all means. But anyways, there was one where Willie Harper. I think Devaney said he walked into it was the halftime of the game of the century, and one of the coaches had Harper up against a locker because one play he got so frustrated with Mildren cutting up and running, and Mildren had a lot of carries, but they did not want him pitching the ball to Pruitt. And one time he just lays out Mildren, but Mildren pitches it to Pruitt, and it's like Pruitt's one big carry of the first half. And that coach was going to make sure that Harper, to your point about having to be disciplined, he was going to make sure he knew not to do that again.
Yeah, but Willie Harper is another guy I should have mentioned. There was a guy that, and I think Bob Devaney said that, Harper was an Outland-worthy guy if he hadn't been playing with guys that won it. That certainly would have been Willie that would have done it. So
All-American and heck of a
Adkins. They just had talent everywhere.
Well, the game is about to end, and Nebraska's going to win it. Here we go.